Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Welcome to Care Week, the Center for Relationships week of free services. We had our kickoff this morning and another webinar that happened about an hour ago, and now we're here for Kara. My name is Lizzie, and I'm the Operations Coordinator at the Center for Relationships, and I'm super excited to welcome you to your child's brain for new parents. I'm a parent myself, so I'm really looking forward to this information. For those of you who are not familiar with us, the Center for Relationships is a community counseling and outreach center based in Austin, Texas, that's expanding all over the rest of Texas. We focus on relationship therapy, relationship education, provide mental health services to individuals, couples, groups, and provide educational resources just like this webinar. This is our second year of taking Care Week fully virtual, and it is the Center for Relationships' 8th year of doing Care Week. And we love being able to reach people and let them know about what we're all about. At the end of the presentation, we're going to let you know how to reach Kara and contact us at the Center for Relationships. And on that note, I would like to present Kara. She has a bachelor's in psychology and of brain and cognitive science, a master's in counseling from St. Edward's University. She specializes in experience with children, adolescents, families, and couples on a variety of issues ranging from ADHD to navigating trauma. She also has experience working with couples of sex and intimacy, parenting, emotional safety, and expression. Her areas of interest include trauma and LGBTQIA plus parents and children. In counseling, Kara works from an attachment and interpersonal neurobiological perspective. She feels honored to be a safe and positive relationship. She feels honored to be a safe and positive relationship for a person in need. Kara is a warm and gentle counselor who is a trauma-informed, sex-positive, identity-affirming, and culturally relational. Outside of clinical work, she is a member of the LGBTQIA plus community. She is passionate about human rights and activism, and she is also an avid runner. I need to do that, and dedicated dog parent. So without further ado, Kara, take it away.
Awesome. Well, yes, thank you, Lizzie. And just to reiterate what she was saying, if anyone has any questions as we go through, Lizzie will be monitoring the chat and kind of letting me know, because otherwise I'm going to be talking, but definitely ask as you go along, and then there will be more of a chance for any questions at the end as well. So feel free to kind of either hold on or ask them whenever they come up. And without any further ado, let's hop in. So to get started, we're going to kind of talk about where brain development begins. And I mean, really it begins like during the prenatal period, right? When you have a kid, they're born with almost all of the neurons they're going to have over the course of their life, which is almost 200 billion neurons when they're born. So it's a truly mind-boggling amount of just the actual biological mass that's going to be there. And in total, the newborn's brain is about a quarter of the size of an adult's brain. And then as your kid grows by about 6 months, it's about half the size of an adult brain. And that's important to note alongside the just that they're born with most of their neurons, because what that means is that all of that growth is the connections. None of that is the actual, you're not getting new neurons. There's no like neurogenesis happening on that front. It's all just those neurons learning how to connect to each other and talk to each other, so that your baby can interact with the world and do things and start to, grow and develop their skills. And so when we're talking about all of those skills developing, you are looking at each neuron trying to connect out, right? And so to give you another bit of numbers to hold on to, since talking about 200 billion neurons is just astronomically difficult to even begin to comprehend. One of my favorite kind of perceptions of how much growth happens during the first couple of years is that at birth, each neuron or per neuron, there's about 2,500 synaptic connections. And then by the time your kid is 2, there's about 15,000 per neuron. And so you're really looking at like many times over amount of growth. And so both in like the sheer mass of the brain and how much it's growing, and then also in number, that those are all the different connections that are working on. So that's important to note, because what we're talking about with kids is they're learning how to do different things, right? So most of these structures are physically in place in the brain. They might be kind of fleshing out details and expanding, and they might not be fully online until further down the line, but the actual connections and conversations are what we're working on, so that the motor part of the brain is able to say, hey, actually, like, we want to be able to move our arms. How about that? And start engaging in that. So that being said, that would be a difficult thing to do kind of in a smooth continuity, because you've kind of got to figure out the basics and then starting on some details and then even further. So taking the motor function as our first kind of example, that's the first area of the brain that goes through like a massive period of growth after birth. So when babies are born, they have a bunch of reflexes, right? So they have the grasping reflex and the rooting reflex and different things that are present for the first couple months of life that are there to help them interact with the world. And so it's all things about being able to like hold on to their caregiver and have some security and do things like that. And once they reach the 2-month point, those reflexes start to drop off, and you see them go down, and that's exciting because it means that your kiddo is starting to be able to interact with the world voluntarily. It's no longer reflexes that aren't registering anywhere else in the brain, that are just kind of a little feedback loop of something touched my hand, better grab it. They're starting to be able to choose what they want to do and how they want to move and interact. So they can reach for things, they can kind of flail about. And that might not seem like it's a lot of skill when, as grown-ups, we have pretty fine motor skills and a lot of other abilities and things that we can get up to. But it is a pretty big difference at that age, because it's the first time that they're able to start doing things. And so when you think about all those things, like from a grown-up perspective, might not seem as important, those are things that you want to be able to start leaning into in terms of bonding and attachment, about responding when they're reaching for things with some enthusiastic tonal voices, which basically means baby talk, which is like, the way people talk to babies, or even like dogs or cats, or kind of, pets, where you're making the like, oh my gosh, he was so handsome kind of voice, because that fluctuation, it's the same thing as like the big motor movements, right? Where like their brain doesn't know tiny differences yet. And so it can't tell the difference between very mildly just neutral versus like a little happy and excited. And so you need it to be big fluctuations so that they can tell the difference and start to respond. And so engaging with them on that level, where when they're reaching for things, you're responding, when and you're keeping the environment really like warm and nice and soft, and things that are going to encourage that kind of outward expansion and interaction with the world, because that's the beginning of their social skills. And about a month after we start to lose those reflexes, the visual function is heading into its kind of big rapid growth. So one of the first really exciting things is around 3 months old babies start to show a preference for face-like objects as opposed to non-face-like objects, which sounds really vague and weird. And you're kind of like, what is a face-like object and why does that matter? Great question. So face-like objects basically means like 2 dots and then a third dot, as opposed to like just 6 random dots, or, things that are like a square. And that's the brain starting to recognize, like, oh, when things around me have the like 2 dots and then like 1 dot, that usually means that I get food, I get held, I get cuddled, I get interaction, I get safety. And so it's starting to show like, oh, that's something that's important, and it's learning about all of that. So that's where like stuffed animals that have faces on them that are like clearly defined are, and by clearly defined, I still just mean like, the 2 little googly eyes and then like a little nose or something, that those are going to continue to reinforce that kind of comforting interaction. And this is sort of, not sort of, it's very much a skill they're learning from 3 months and on, because by about a year, they show a preference for even upside down versus right side up human faces, versus they show no preference when you show them like monkey faces or stuffed animal faces that are upside down in the wrong direction. And so they're really like, faces are such an important thing that they're fine tuning. And that's also where you start to like, people make the exaggerated facial expressions at babies. Like there are reasons that our brains hold on to those as responses to infants. So those are all things to keep in mind about ways to connect to your newborn when, you can't really talk with them yet. Alrighty. So continuing with kind of just taking a look and reiterating how to use those kinds of brain developments as ways to interact with your kiddo. Being excited about whatever skill they're working on as it comes online, because that's going to encourage them to explore that. It's going to show that you're joining them. They're going to feel aligned, that like the things that their brain wants to work on, you're also responding to, and making sure to provide an environment that encourages and fosters that. So soft toys with faces, and then exciting, colorful light up toys that are like a little bit out of reach, so that they're working on moving towards them or reaching for them. And most of us provide that in just the ways that we show up and interact with children, with the sing-song voice. And it doesn't really matter what you're saying, because language is so far off. So you can be super frustrated with your partner and be saying like, and like, daddy's got to go do this because otherwise I'm going to be really mad at him. Yes, I am. And like, your kid has no idea what they're saying, but they're really excited about the tone of voice. So you can kind of have 2 parallel conversations about what you're saying and then how you're saying it, and getting used to differentiating those with kids, because they're putting all those pieces together. So in that vein, when you're starting to talk about both kind of what you're doing experience-wise and the environment, we're starting to talk about the difference between experience expedient and experience dependent development things. So those are weird words, but basically experience expedient is things that if it's in the environment, if it's there, the brain's going to develop it. So if there's visual patterns, if the caregiver is there to provide affection, if they hear language, if they get the right nutrition, they're going to grow. They're going to learn how to have social interactions. They're going to learn how to speak. And this does come with the caveat of, we are talking about neurotypical, developmentally normal children. So if you find that something is not hitting the milestones and other such things, just go talk to your pediatrician, go talk to the doctors in your life, and see if they can help you start to get a map on what's going on. And there's lots of information resources out there for non-neurotypical children, but for the sake of this talk, we're focusing on neurotypical development patterns and kind of how do you use that to engage. So of the things that children need for their brain to kind of develop normally, affection from caregivers is really front and center. And that's something that, like, as a grown up, right, we know, like, okay, I need food, I need shelter, and then also, like, affection is nice. And as a baby, like, those are the same level of importance, right? So they really are learning that kind of not learning, but like that's how important that is, because they can't do anything for themselves. And so their caregiver, which is just kind of a gender neutral word for your mom, dad, parents, grandparent, anyone who's there, being attuned and showing affection with the tonal voices, with warm, soft touches, with playing and providing an environment that's safe. That's all stuff that's going to, like, allow the brain to do the normal stuff that it needs to do. And then experience dependent variables, or experience dependent developmental stuff, basically means like the unique kind of cultural things that go on. So, like, depending on where your kid grows up and what kind of activities they're learning, their motor cortex is going to form slightly differently. So they might be more prone to, if you take your kids hiking versus if they're doing more fine motor skills, there's just going to be, and they're going to develop the range of skills. But it's kind of like when you start to, if you watch your friend who plays a sport different from you and you're like, I don't know that I could make my body do that. That's an experience dependent thing where there's learning, there's intentional differences that have to develop. So when we're looking at kind of the infant and toddler age range, we're much more in the experience expedient side of things, where we're kind of trying to provide like the right environment and the right sense of safety so that the brain can do what it needs to do. And then there will be more like kind of particular channeled learning that you can choose later to encourage and foster. And this is where I come with the mild warning of, for a second, we're going to talk about some not so happy topics, but I think that they're really important because there's a lot of abuse and neglect that happens even in America, and being able to recognize that experience amongst, children might come into your life that have different backgrounds and have been exposed to different things, and being able to kind of have an idea of what those kids are working on and what you can help them with and what they might struggle with a little bit more, means that you're able to then be the kind of support system that they need. And so that's really where we start to come into the social interaction part, especially, right, where even amongst infants and toddlers, if they experienced abuse, their limbic system, which is like how you regulate emotions and socially interact with people, is just not as strong and as well built out and connected. And if they experienced neglect, then there's fewer connections between all the different areas of the brain, broadly speaking. And so that whole thing, remember how I was saying that the brain goes from being like a quarter the size of an adult brain to about 6 months being half the size of an adult brain? It doesn't grow as much. There's not as much connections that happen when your kid isn't getting the social interactions that they need. And by social interactions that they need, I also mean if you're there, if you're showing up, if you're trying, you're doing it, you're all good. So this is not like if one night when you're really fed up and they're screaming because they have a cold and you're slowly losing your mind, that you like are also crying and sound frustrated. I don't mean that. That's okay. We're not worried about that. So just keeping that difference in mind. And now we can kind of leave some of the sadder options behind and return back. So in talking about social skills and how important social interactions are, your brain as a grown-up, and also your kids' brains, have these really specialized neurons built in called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons are a lot of how we learn how to do things on an intuitive level. So like they're not very helpful for calculus. They're very helpful for social skills and for learning to walk and learning to just do things around the house. So a prime example of what happens is if one kid smile, or like when you smile at a little baby, right? And then they smile back, that's mirror neurons kind of activating. So they exist in all areas of your brain, from the emotion regulation side into movement, into speaking. And when someone around you does that action, the mirror neurons in the corresponding part of your area light up. So like if I watch someone walking, the mirror neurons in my brain that are focused on walking and movement are kind of shooting up their little things and saying, ooh, what if we did that? And that's a lot of how infants are learning how to do things, because they don't understand language yet. They don't understand explicit instruction. And so it's that watching and the mirror neuron starting to reinforce, like, okay, that's what muscles look like they're up to during that movement. And let's try it. And okay, that's what crawling looks like. And that's what walking is like. And so grown-ups around your kiddo doing the same activities that they're working on, that's going to have alignment with those mirror neurons, and you're going to have that connection, and that's going to continue to foster feeling joined, feeling connected to each other. It's going to help them learn how to do those things more and more, and it's going to kind of help the brain have an easier time, because that's the intuitive learning system that your infant and your young kid is operating from. This is also how they learn language acquisition, but also empathy and what we call theory of mind, which is basically the ability to say, like, me, Kara, I am having the experience of being happy, but my friend who just fell down on the playground is having the experience of being sad, and being able to recognize that there's two different experiences going on at the same time. And that doesn't really start to show up until about age 4. So that's important to note, because your kids' mirror neurons are helping them learn how to do things, but like your kid doesn't really understand the difference between their experience and someone else's experience until then. The systems for that start to come online at 4, but if up until that point it feels a little like you're living with just an egocentric tiny entity, it's because you are, and that's what they're supposed to be doing, so that they can learn how to do all these other basic things, because learning to walk and learning to see is really hard, and their brains need to be that focused on themselves in order to learn all of those basic skills. Okay, so now we get into some even more nebulous concepts like temperament. So temperament is sort of like personality. That's kind of one way to think about it, but it's basically the way that people respond to their environment. And it's something that can be not like measured in a consistent way, but it appears prenatally, really. When infants are still, in the womb, like anyone who's been pregnant with multiple children can usually talk about, like, one kid was more active, one of them, there were differences between the experience of being pregnant with one kid versus the other. And that's temperament showing up really that early. And it continues to show up. I mean, even right from birth, children's different temperaments show up in their reaction to distress, and how they handle, avoiding that or not avoiding that, and like how their system tolerates it. And then in the same way, kind of, they show how they handle anger and frustration by about 2 to 3 months. And then you'll start to see them respond with smiling and different stimuli, and how they're able to integrate that into their system. And then by the time they're like 7 to 10 months, you can see fearfulness start to come online and how they navigate that. So all of this is just to show that temperament shows up really early. It's not something that's going to wait until 3 years old to be online or develop. And it's currently thought of as kind of a combination of neurobiological versus neurochemical, which basically means some of it is an ingrained genetic predisposition one way or the other, and some of it is something that they'll learn how to regulate as they continue to go along. And that's where, as I was talking through just some examples of the different things that kids are learning at different points, like they don't do fearfulness until a bit later, but anger and frustration come online earlier. Just getting more information before they start in on those things, but taking the chance to get to know your kid's temperament and what environment they need. Some kids are going to be way more anxious. They just are. And sometimes there can be this impulse to like, oh, but I don't want my kids to be anxious, so I'm going to try to help them learn how to not be anxious starting at this really early age. And the reality is that's not how it plays out. When we kind of try to create an environment that isn't just caring for that temperament, those kids are the most likely to experience problems down the line. So everything from depression to acting out to, impulse control. So the more we can kind of say, okay, if I've got an anxious kid, then I'm going to try to be around them more, and I'm going to be more attuned to the kinds of things that help them feel settled and feel engaged.
Hey, Kara, we have a quick little question here.
Mhm.
Can you write at what months it was just mentioned, fear and other temperaments when it comes to babies?
Yeah. So let me kind of walk through some of those again. So you'll start to notice even different like activity levels kind of prenatal, like before birth. And then after that, at birth, you can see kind of their reactions to distress show up. So that's kind of a nondescript, like not anger, not fear, but like when they need to be changed, when they're hungry, just kind of like something is not right. And then at about 2 to 3 months, you'll start to see anger and frustration come in. So when they start to be able to voluntarily choose to do things and it might not work for them, like reaching for something and they might miss. And then about 7 to 10 months, and up to a little bit earlier. So let's say 6 to 10 months, you'll start to see like voluntary smiling and stimulus response, and also responses to fear, and how they handle fear. And so all of this is not just that emotion coming up, it's kind of what they do with that emotion. And are they able to navigate out of it quickly? Does it stick with them a little bit longer? Do they get lost in it? Does it, there's a lot of different ways to kind of take a look at and measure that. Did that start to answer our question? I can definitely repeat it again if anyone needs.
Yep. Thank you.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you, Lizzie. And thank you to whoever asked that question. So when we're then talking about like, okay, let's say you do have a kid that gets angry faster, right? And gets stuck in that, that you might feel the need to kind of try to help them, not just kind of soothe from that, but that like maybe you don't want them to get angry so often or da da da. And that goes back to the whole temperament thing where like really you just staying calm and supportive and responding, which is way easier said than done, I recognize. That's got the best evidence long term, because developmentally your kid is supposed to be feeling their feelings. We don't want to teach them that any feelings are wrong, because there are times where it's fair to be angry, and we might not feel it about the fire truck falling over, because we've got other things to be angry about in our life, but each of those emotions serves a real purpose. And so what we want to do is stay with them. You want to, like an example that's pretty common even with toddlers, right, is timeout. And one of the things I always like to talk about with timeout is if your kid, let's say, right, gets angry and starts yelling and sort of has a temper tantrum because their fire truck fell over. And you say, okay, well, it's time for a timeout. You couldn't calm down. I gave you these chances. We practiced these other skills. And so you got to go to your room. When you send them away to have a temper tantrum and to have that by themselves, you're teaching them that emotion and that expression of their personality and their temperament is not okay to have with other people. So something that's slightly more ideal is maybe picking a spot that can be like the timeout spot, or the calm down spot that's in the communal space, so that you're not teaching them that they are going to be sent away, which, remember, is really distressing to kids' systems, because being connected, being with their caregiver is the same safety level as like food and shelter and all of that. And so you're taking away something that feels really important to them at a moment when they're really overwhelmed when you do something like that. And that's not the way that most of us were taught to think about it. But saying, okay, let's, you have to go sit in the calm down chair or the calm down corner, or, get a small bean bag or one of the little kid rocking chairs or something, give them a little, soothing fidget toy, and tell them you're setting a timer for 1 minute. And do we have another question?
We do. Yes.
Yay.
Going back a little bit with an age group. Can a parent do anything to help their child cope or let go of anger or any emotions during the 6 to 10 month mark? Or is this nature or genetic?
Yeah, so it's kind of a combination. And part of what we're thinking about is less of a like, I want to help my kid not get angry. And we're working more on the soothing. So you can help them learn to calm down faster. And that's because your body is really good at getting worked up about things, and then helping them kind of come back down and settle into kind of, let's just call it baseline, like kind of your, everything's all right. And like, you're not especially happy, you're not especially sad, everything's just chugging along. That's kind of where you're operating from at that point. So when you're talking about helping kind of a 6-year-old soothe, they also don't know how to do that on their own. So that's where you want to stay calm and soothed and settled, and you want to stay with them, because those mirror neurons are going to help their system match your system. And so when they're angry and they're upset, and I know that they can have some lungs on them and they can start screaming, and you're not going to do this perfectly most of the time, and that's totally okay. That's the great news, is just being there and trying is infinitely more impactful than not showing up and not trying. Like, you can do it imperfectly and you're still going to be 95% of the way there, right? But just being with them and modeling being able to take deep breaths and settle and maybe have a hug and like whatever their nervous system needs. And at, the 6 to 10 month stage, right, they don't know words yet. You can't ask them, do you want a hug or do you want me to sit next to you? And so you're just trying things, but especially kind of the deep breathing is helpful. When kids are angry, a little bit of, if you can just, not cold, but like stay in air conditioning or next to a fan, because our bodies get warm when we're angry, and the nerves that help us settle and soothe are brought online by cold temperatures, or by like eating or swallowing. That's where we get a lot of the like soothing from eating, where I like to think about, like, even for grown-ups, right, the go-to example of like when you go through a breakup is someone showing up with ice cream, which is both cold and you're eating it. So that there's different things like that we can do, but just getting to know your kid, and you'll start to know what sorts of things can help settle them and soothe them out of anger. and that you just want to stay with them and try to stay calm yourself. So whatever helps you stay calm, and their nervous system will start to regulate to match yours. So that becomes a problem if they're getting angrier and angrier and you're getting angrier and angrier, and then both of you are just really angry together, rather than your kid getting angrier and you staying, settled for the moment, and their nervous system coming back down to meet you, and then you hand them off to the other parent and you can go, be angry yourself, in your own space, because you're a grown-up who is able to self-regulate that. Alrighty. Did that kind of cover our...
Thank you, Kara.
No problem. I appreciate it. Those are great questions. So please keep them coming. And all of this is really like, it's much easier when you're starting to talk about like the brain is working on motor development at this stage, and kind of the more nebulous we're getting, the more confusing it gets. There's a million research articles behind each of these areas. So if you definitely are like, something doesn't make sense, you went through that too fast, can you talk about how to handle that? Please ask questions, because there's a lot more that I could give a talk about, like each of these individual topics. And so if I'm missing something that you're curious about, please just let me know. So yeah, for temperament, the point is really that like trying to make your kid, especially before that like 3 or 4 year age, where they don't have the ability to do empathy yet, and they don't have the ability to understand that other people are having different feelings. You're relying on the mirror neurons, you're relying on your ability to help soothe them. And by you, I really mean they are, because they don't have those skills yet. They can't really self-soothe in that way. They can have faith that you will come help them. And that's kind of the trust that you're operating on. So just doing your best to, and that's where it's kind of that, like, if most of the time you stay sort of calm and you're there with them, you got it. You're doing great. You do not have to be perfect. If we had to be perfect, then the human race would not have gotten this far. So you are in good company. And something to keep in mind during all this, and that'll start to bring us into our kind of last big topic, is that kids are going to have a preference for one caregiver for the first like couple, at least the first year. And it's because they're learning how to form that attachment and that connection. And so they're going to show a preference for one person as they're kind of like forming that skill. And then they'll start to kind of expand out from there. And that brings us into attachment. So attachment is kind of, it's a broad theory, but also specifically right now, what we're talking about is the attachment to their primary caregiver, which culturally is often the parent that carried them. So usually mom, but can be whoever spends the most time with your kid. And I'm so sorry, our dogs are barking. If you hear them in the background, please, we're just going to ignore it and keep on going. So attachment is something that is formed as early as birth, because that's the first time you're getting any separation, right? And attachment is kind of all about how you and your kid handle being both two different beings that also need each other. And specifically that your kid needs you in order to do things. And so it begins at birth, and it can be clearly seen and measured in a like, this is the pattern that's emerging way, that is consistent and able to be recognized by 7 months. And so once again, I think that's a really important thing to take a look at, because by then your kid doesn't know language. You are really operating on that, like they're working on motor skills, they're working on their visual things. And so a lot of that is coming from kind of those temperament moments and those moments of distress that we were talking about before, where they're upset about something and you come in and you do your best to, feed them, change them, help rock them to sleep. And at the very least, just be a settled, soothed person in their environment. And that's how that attachment is formed. And secure attachment has all kinds of relations to better emotional navigation down the line, to a better job with work environments, with more successful relationships, with, it's the research about all the different ways that that shows up is, there's a huge bank of all of that. So if it's something that you're interested in, I can go on about it for hours. And also there's so many fantastic articles and resources out there to read about it. But the main thing is you definitely want to be aiming for a secure attachment, because in a secure relationship, what happens is that the primary caregiver is here and your infant is here, and they're able to kind of use primary caregiver as the secure base to go out and explore the world from and then come back. And so they're able to regulate what is too much and when they need to come get safety on their own. And they're using you as a way to do that in the world. So they might come check in with you, if it's a new playground, right, that they might want you to walk around it with them. And then they might play a little bit on their own. And then you can sit on the bench and watch and da da da. And especially when they're, even younger and at kind of that 6-month mark, you'll see it by how they react when you leave the room and they're left with a stranger. That's kind of the stereotypical example. And just all the different parts that are coming up with that. So that's where you want to show attunement, you want to show engagement with where they're at developmentally, so that as they're forming all those millions of connections in their brain, they feel supported and secure in needing to try things that might be scary, that might be stressing, that might make them angry, and that you're going to be there to help soothe them so that they can be figuring out the world and building those connections. So as kind of a little bit of the review of how to with that, there's 4 notable traits of secure parents, which is number 1, that they are sensitive to their infant's needs and signs. So what that means, right, is if your baby is crying, that you go in and check on them and figure out, are they hungry? Do they need to be changed? Do they need to be rocked back to sleep? Are they just feeling uncomfortable and I just need to be with them so that they have me there to help make it a little bit easier to be uncomfortable? And so primary caregivers that are aware of, that are able to start to tell the difference between like, okay, yeah, when they're moving like this or crying like this, that's a sign that they're hungry, or da 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 da. Kind of the more you get to know them and can help meet their needs and be sensitive to those, that's one of the primary signs. Number 2 was that they adjusted their own behavior to match the mood of their infant. So once again, this is way easier said than done, but that rather than kind of the, you're having a bad day and you're frustrated and your kid is really happy, but their system is going to come to yours. And so they start off happy and then they start to get more and more frustrated or more and more scared or, other things as they interact with you. And it's just because you're having your own independent feelings that's not going to teach them that when they interact with you, they feel safe and happy. That's going to teach them that when they interact with you, they start to feel scared or they start to feel upset. And once again, it's important to note this is a most of the time thing, not a like, if you make this mistake 5 times, then you're out and your kid is not going to be secure. Attachment can shift well into adulthood. It takes a lot more effort the older you get, but it definitely can be done. So if you had a really bad day and you're frustrated and you realize that your kiddo is kind of joining you in being frustrated and they're mirroring you, you didn't fail. It just means you had a bad day. And that the next time maybe you want to take 5 minutes to practice some breathing and some nervous system regulation tools in your car before you come inside, so that you're a little bit more joining their happy emotions or able to help them settle. And this is just because they're still learning how to do all this, right? And so they're entirely reliant on you for how to do that. So number 3 is that they're accepting no matter what frustration or irritation the parent might be feeling. So that's kind of if your kid is screaming in the middle of HEB and you sort of also feel like screaming in the middle of the grocery store because everyone is now screaming in the middle of the grocery store, that you're able to say, okay, it's just what's happening, and I'm frustrated, but I'm gonna deal with the situation on hand. I'm gonna deal with my frustration. I'm gonna, get us out of the grocery store and to the car, and we're gonna settle there, and I'm gonna be with them. And that you're just doing your best to accept the situation and navigate from there, rather than kind of trying to kind of go back and fix or engage with the situation in a different way. Number 4 is that they're physically and psychologically available. And so what that means is, when your kid is crying in their bed at night and you don't want to get up because you haven't slept for more than 3 hours in like a month, that you still get up and you're physically there and you're talking to them in soothing tones, even if mentally you're like, I just want to be in bed. And being able to do all of this is also dependent on that whole, it takes a village approach. So it doesn't have to be the one caregiver. It's just that your kid might show a preference, but it does not mean that the other caregivers are not important, that they're not sending the same signals of safety, that they're not, providing that same thing. It's just to kind of acknowledge that your kid's brain is going to sort of pick one to be the primary safety person. And then from there, you're all going to figure out how that primary person needs to be supported in order to be able to be the primary support. So whether that's that, when your kid is an infant, that you need a doula to come in once a week for the first couple months so that you get at least one night of sort of sleep, then do that. If you've got a lot of family in the area that can come support you and give you a night off to go, either be social if that's what you need, or just sleep, or just rest, or connect with your partner. That the whole point is your kid's system is going to be dependent on you. And so you have to be able to take care of yourself in order to give them. And so I kind of think about it and talk about it as the oxygen mask on airplanes. Whenever you hear the whole put your mask on before helping others around you, and that idea comes from the if you focus on trying to get your kid's mask on first, you might pass out before you even finish getting their mask on. But if you can get yours on, you're not going to pass out, and then you can help them and ensure that everyone's okay. So it comes from that kind of premise and place of origin. So that kind of brings us to the end of our attachment section and leaves us with this short list of things to try to do that I will continue to reiterate is aspirational. We're not going to do it correctly all or every time. We're just aiming for most of the time. The most important thing is that you show up, that you're there, that even if you do it imperfectly, someone's there with them in it, trying to figure out how to navigate it with them. That you listen to your child, which is hard when they can't talk, but that you listen to all of the variety of signals that they do have available to them that they're using to try to talk to you. That when they're young, you're not trying to change them. You're trying to help them learn things, but you're not trying to change their entire personality or temperament, because that's just going to cause them to feel shame about it. And there's a lot of that they can't change yet. and they might not ever be able to. So instead, what you want to teach them to do is have the tools to navigate it with you, and that you engage with them and show curiosity towards learning and developing new skills together. So that if you also have a hard time soothing from anger, great. That's a great time to be working on it, because a lot of us never learned how to soothe properly from anger. And there's a whole lot of tools out there to help you with that, both in books and online and on YouTube, and also at places like the Center for Relationships, where all of our therapists are really well equipped to help you learn how to deal with that as a parent, in your own relationships, in all kinds of things. So this is the part where we were going to kind of start to do the Q&A section and leave up some of the resources for where you can reach us.
Great job, Kara. I had no idea that it was so scientific with the child. And I have 2 kids myself, and that was pretty cool, for sure.
Good. I'm glad. And yes, it is a lot of information, and I just threw a lot at all of you. So please go back. Your questions can be just like, wait, what was that? Can you talk about that again? Or that made no sense. Can you explain it in another way? I will be 0% upset about anything, because I just tried to explain some very complex topics in a like pretty short spiely way. So bring along whatever questions or thoughts.
If anyone has any questions, we can also let you speak as well. If you would rather have more of a conversation with Kara, that's also an option too.
Yeah, I would love to chat and hear people's thoughts or questions, or even if you have any good stories about like, oh yeah, actually this makes this thing that my kid does make sense, or I have no idea why my kid does this. Anyone have any thoughts? This is just kind of our chance to chat.
Has a question. Can you describe the different characteristics of temperament you see in infants?
Yeah. So temperament is, and this is where it's a little important to note that temperament is different from personality. So where you might, but there is a lot of crossover territory. So personality is going to be something that we more think about as like fully fleshed later, but especially in infants, you can sort of think of them as similar things. So temperament would be like, some kids are more anxious or fearful. So let's think about with an infant, right? That you get them a new toy that makes a lot of noise. Like, I'm just going to pick like, everyone knows what a Tickle Me Elmo is up to, right? Like, it looks like Elmo, it turns on and there's like some laughter and it kind of moves. And if that's kind of one of their first like moving and noise making toys, that could be kind of scary, right? Because something that all of a sudden, up until this point only did things when you were the one to prompt it, by shaking a rattle or knocking something over, is now making noise and doing something independent, and it's not a human and it's not your toy. And what on earth is Elmo up to? That some kids might get scared, and getting scared as an infant is going to be bursting into tears and kind of panicking and like, oh my gosh. And so Tickle Me Elmo might be really scary. And some kids might immediately start laughing because their system might handle that as a like, okay, that sounds like laughter, that's good enough. And so you'll just see different kind of responses in that way, where you'll start to get an idea about like, if your kid responds to every new stimulus with some nervousness and with some anxiety, then your kid is a little bit more anxious. And so you just want to know that when you're taking them into a new space, they're going to need a little bit more soothing. They might need to bring their security blanket item along. They might, and that you want to continue to encourage that. You don't want to say, oh my gosh, you always get so scared, let's not bring your security blanket. You want to say, okay, so let's bring all the security blankets and let's bring your favorite food. Let's make sure that there's, the limited number of new things that your brain is trying to work on. And that you're prepared yourself that that's probably going to be a little bit more of an exhausting afternoon. So Did that kind of answer questions? Anyone have any more?
I feel that way as an adult sometimes. If there's too many new things, it's like, whoa, overload.
Yeah. No, and that's a really great like way to, because we still have the same temperaments as we grow up, right? And if you're going to do something brand new and you start to get overwhelmed, if someone around you says like, oh my God, Lizzie, just don't be overwhelmed. Like that doesn't
It's so
help.
easy.
Yeah. If they're like, I'm not overwhelmed, why are you overwhelmed? You're like, yeah, geez, I never thought of that before. Thanks. And versus instead, if they say, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about this being overwhelming, but do you want a piece of chocolate? Do you want to go take a break outside? Do you want da da da? That helps you so much, even if you don't actually get to, oh my gosh, my dog is having a time. I'm so sorry.
No worries. Here's
Children.
another question for, oh, you can see it. Go for it.
I now have the chat up because
Yay.
I'm not presenting from my own notes and things. Do children who need their comfy toy or security blanket feel insecure in general? And can a parent do anything to help in that part? So children are going to feel insecure in general. It's a scary world. They're working on a lot of new things. So a security blanket is just a way that they're kind of bringing that security that they feel with mom or dad into the rest of the world with them. So think about it as kind of like, it's just like a way to kind of physically bring that snuggly, cozy safety with them. So it's definitely not a sign that they're insecure. Most children do it in some way, shape, or form. And that's another example of kind of wanting to meet their temperament, where some kids might only need it when they're going to bed, because going to sleep is a time of separation too, right? You fall asleep often in a different room from your parents. That can be really scary. So most kids like something, have their stuffy or their lovey or security blanket that they go to bed with. If they also need it when they go to a friend's house or grandma's house or to the grocery store, that's totally fine. If they're still bringing it everywhere when they're 6 or 7, maybe you start to have some conversations about that. But if they're 3, 4, even like almost wanting to bring it to kindergarten, maybe see if there's a smaller way that you can bring it. Can you get a little part of the blanket? Can you get a mini teddy bear that goes like a keychain that goes on the backpack? There's all kinds of ways you can try to kind of help bridge those gaps. But that whole thing is that like their brain is going, yeah, mom is safety. The world is scary. This blanket goes with mom. Mom can't be with me, but the blanket can be with me. And then sort of mom is with me because the blanket is with me. So maybe I'm safe as long as I have it. And that's what we want their brain to be doing, is trying to learn how to expand that circle of safety into the rest of the world. So I'm a huge fan of security blankets. Mine is somewhere in this house, actually, still somewhere. I don't exactly know where, but I do know it's here. So
that's all that matters sometimes. Just knowing that it's there. Just knowing that mom or dad are back there. It's going to be okay. My daughter started daycare last year, so that was a big thing. And she has a little teddy bear. Like one of those little, well, we call it a lovey, but it's got like it's like an owl head and then like a blanket attached to it. As the body. I think it was from Target or something. And so she sleeps with that. But when we started daycare, they let her bring it just for the first couple days. And then I was like, okay, you're good now. Owl stays home now. And there's a little transition period. And now she's like, don't pick me up. I'm staying all day. You're good.
Yeah. And that's that, that was probably some of the first times that she wasn't with you or dad or grandma and grandpa, and like not kind of her secure people. It's a new space. It's a new group of people. So Owl going to daycare with her for the first few days, perfect example of her learning, like, I've got this piece of security with me while I learn that daycare is safe and secure. So that's a perfect example.
Awesome. Do we have any more questions, you guys? Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you, Kara, for a wonderful presentation.
No problem. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.